Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Well, thank you so much, and a pleasure to be here. I definitely miss not being in person. I've virtually always come in person, which I prefer. It didn't work out today, so I'm on Zoom, and I'll give you my usual Zoom greeting, and you can do it in the hall or on Zoom. But I like in starting a session to go like this. You can do this in the hall if you want. Okay. So anyway, very good to be with everyone and to be back with GBF. We have a long association, and I think, as many of you know, I was connected with the very origins of GBF, I think around 1992, 93, which came out of a gathering that I co-organized for the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, a big gathering. So it's, I really cherish my connection and relationship with GBF. And as promised, I'm intending to give a juicy Dharma talk, but it'll be your call as to whether that happens. What I'd like to explore is something I've been thinking about actually pretty recently, although it goes back in my own history. And this is really about the kind of the shared heart of our spiritual practice, thinking of it in a way that actually goes beyond traditions and can be expressed in ordinary language. I've been talking about this lately with Sylvia Boorstein, but it also goes back a long way for me. And it really relates to, I think, a question or a set of questions which many of us have. You know, it might go like this. I like meditation. Meditation is cool. Am I a Buddhist? Not sure. Some days I am, some days I'm not, right? Or we may reflect on the teachings of the Buddha, which basically, you know, if you remember the teaching about taking everything that I've taught like a raft, when you get to the other shore, don't carry the raft on your shoulders. And so this very, very practical sense of the teachings and practices, or some of you remember the dialogue that he had with the people of Kālāma. It's in the Kālāma Sutta, where they said to him, we get so many teachers coming through here, what should we believe? And he said, don't believe it because it was spoken by a teacher. Don't believe it because it comes from tradition, but only when you've tested it out and seen what accords with wisdom and your own maturation, then take it as important. You know, so interesting really to reflect on this. And I've also thought of some of my own experiences that, what I'll maintain is that although we ground in Buddhist teachings and practices, it's helpful to see them in a way that they express something very simple, I think very profound, but they go beyond simply being Buddhist teachings and practices, and that we can see very clearly resonance with other approaches, other traditions. You know, so the question, am I a Buddhist? In India, one wouldn't, you know, in the origins of the teachings of the Buddha, one wouldn't call oneself a Buddha, or a Buddhist, I should say. It's okay to call yourself a Buddha. Okay. but you wouldn't call yourself a Buddhist because the very concept of religion is a Western concept. There they would say, I'm a student of the Dharma, right? And even in the current framework of Indian so-called religion, Buddhism is not seen as fundamentally different from Hinduism. They're all part of the same offering, even right now. Or I think of the way that when I lived in Kentucky, which I did for 4 years, I was a teacher at the University of Kentucky. And I would go out, I started going out to the Abbey of Gethsemane, where Thomas Merton was a monk, Catholic monastery. And I went there about once a month. I was part of a group called the Thomas Merton Group. And it was wonderful. We got to read unpublished manuscripts from Thomas Merton, which have since been published. This was in the 1980s. And I was a Buddhist practitioner. You know, there were nuns there from the Sisters of Loretto, some monks from the monastery, some basically Catholic practitioners from nearby. And they never talked. We never talked about the differences between Christian and Buddhist theology or teachings. Rather, everything was really practical. We talked about how do you work with fear? You know, what develops insight? What develops a sense of love? That was what, you know, in 4 years of being part of that group, I don't recall talking about differences between Christian and Buddhist teachings and practices. There was something that was shared in that context. And I also think about the way that at Spirit Rock, at our retreats, we have Christian nuns come, Jewish rabbis, people from other traditions come, and they find themselves very much at home. So I'm going to make use of a Buddhist framework to point to what are our core teachings, but I'll then try to show how the core teachings and practices really have total resonance with other approaches. So it is important to ground in a tradition. But I'm going to say that the core is very much practical. It's like there's an old story in the Jewish Hasidic tradition of a seeker who went to study with a Hasidic teacher, the Maggid of Mezerich. And he said, I didn't go to study with this person to hear him teach the Torah, to hear him give the teachings. Rather, I went there to see how he tied his shoelaces. Shoelace meditation, very, very crucial. You know, no, but the larger point is that there was something on this very primal level that he was looking for beyond the words or concepts, something really crucial. The way that the Dalai Lama says, my religion is kindness, you know, and says that, you know, there's something that goes beyond me being a Buddhist. The way that Gandhi said that there was a heart unity to all traditions at a time when there was sometimes tension in India between Hindus and Buddhists and Sikhs and Muslims and Christians. He said, we are all aligned. There is a heart unity there for all of us. So how do we understand this? What I'll do is I'll briefly talk about the foundations of our teachings and practice in Buddhist terms. And I'm inspired by hearing from a Vietnamese friend named Thich Minh Duc. He was a Buddhist monk. And he told me some of the history of Buddhism in Vietnam. And he said that in the 1930s, when there was still a struggle against colonialism, he said the Buddhists in Vietnam modified the traditional teaching that the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings and practices, are like a bird that has two wings. The wings are wisdom and compassion. And they added, you have to add courage. So it becomes wisdom and compassion and courage. And I've thought of courage as connected with action. And it really connects really with the sense of ethics and ethically based action in our world and how we relate to others and so forth. So I'm going to frame the kind of the review I do very simply of Buddhist teachings in terms of first ethics, then kind of the heart practices to develop compassion. Compassion is really shorthand for compassion, loving kindness, joy, and so forth. And then thirdly, wisdom. I'm going to talk briefly about these, talk about the essence of how these appear, and then talk and really point to how all of these can go beyond particularly Buddhist teachings and be expressed very simply in ordinary language. So here goes. So what's the essence of ethics? Again, the Dalai Lama said that we can talk about this really simply. He said, what we need today is an approach to ethics which makes no recourse to religion and can be equally acceptable to those with faith and those without, a secular ethics. He said, ethics without religion is like water. Ethics with religion is like tea, flavored water. We can live without tea and flavoring, but we can't live without water. And so he said there's that basics. When we think about the Buddhist ethics, you know, the 5 ethical precepts that we often remember at the beginning of retreats, they are not to harm, not to hurt others, you know, more broadly, nonviolence. The second precept, not taking that which is not given. The third, care with sexuality, care and respect with sexuality. The fourth, care with speech, wise speech. The fifth, care with substances which shift consciousness. And we could expand these precepts, which to me sound like they can be expressed and understood as coming from Buddhist tradition, but really going beyond tradition and not, you know, and available to anyone, right? So, and they can be expanded so that we understand all of those precepts also in terms of our relational lives and how we relate to others in the larger society, non-harming, you know, non-violence and so forth, not taking that which is not given in our larger economic system. And so to me, it makes sense that that kind of grounding in ethics can be expressed very simply in ordinary language and is really a basis for understanding for really all human beings. I think we can say something similar with the second broad area of our practice, which is to develop kindness, like the Dalai Lama saying, my religion is kindness. And when we think of our practice of loving kindness and compassion and joy and equanimity, there's something there that I think also is very simple, but also very deep, right? How do we manifest love and compassion in our own hearts and in our own lives. This is really, to me, a very ancient vocation, which we find going back in multiple traditions, but it's expressed very beautifully. Some of you know the Metta Sutta, the discourse on loving kindness. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none. With a boundless heart, should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded. It's a very, very deep, simple practice that can really, again, be expressed very simply. Maybe like many of you, I often, when I'm going to meet with someone or teach, I take an intention to manifest kindness, like the Dalai Lama. And I have people I work with who take this very simple practice and bring it into their work as therapists, as health workers. Several people I work with basically manifest metta all day long in medical settings, right? Probably many of you do something very similar. Very simple. A lot of people I work with also, I work with several young parents who are dedicated to bringing metta into their loving kindness, into their time with their children. One person told the story of how with a 1-year-old who was waking up very frequently at 1, 3, and 5 in the morning. And my student wasn't able to sleep well and was getting grumbly, and then remembered metta and said, okay, I have metta practice at 1, 3, and 5 in the morning. Yay. So this is, again, very, very simple and very profound, but it's also something that can be understood and talked about across traditions, or even without any tradition. Mark Twain said, kindness is the language that the blind can see and the deaf can hear. Kindness is the language the blind can see and the deaf can hear. We find this in other traditions as well. From the Jewish Talmud, it said, the highest form of wisdom is kindness. In the Jewish mystical text called the Zohar, it said, quoting the Psalms, the world shall be built on love. By this the world endures. From Thomas Merton in the Christian tradition, our job is to love others without stopping to inquire whether or not they are worthy. That is not our business, and in fact, it is nobody's business. What we are asked to do is to love, and this love will render both ourselves and our neighbors worthy. From the great Christian Saint Teresa of Avila, accustom yourself continually to make many acts of love, for they kindle and melt the soul. So again, what I'm suggesting is that the basics of our practice are simple. We ground in Buddhist practice, that's drawn us, but it can be helpful to understand how we can both express all of this very simply in ordinary language, which helps with communication with friends and family. And we can also understand this as a basis for really connecting with people both across traditions and with those who have no tradition. From the Islamic tradition, from Rumi, the great poet, love is the water of life. Drink it down with heart and soul. And then from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., probably might be said to be the most important moral and spiritual voice in the US. He says this call for a worldwide fellowship that lifts neighborly concern beyond one's own tribe, race, class, and nation is in reality a call for an all-embracing and unconditional love for all. When I speak of love, I am not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I am speaking of that force which all the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. So again, across all human cultures and traditions, and also can be expressed very simply. Again, from the Dalai Lama, be kind whenever possible. It is always possible. So I like that. Be kind whenever possible. It is always possible. Very good one for refrigerators, right? So then the last area I want to talk about is wisdom. And I want to say there's also this understanding of wisdom that in Buddhist practice, on the basis of concentration and mindfulness, we develop wisdom. It's also seen as the heart of other traditions from the Jewish Bible and Proverbs. Incline thine ear into wisdom and apply thine heart to understanding. Also from Proverbs, happy is one who findeth wisdom and one who getteth understanding. Or the way that the whole tradition of Western philosophy, the very meaning of philosophy is the love of wisdom. In Buddhist tradition, we first develop concentration. It's said, the Buddha says, one who is concentrated understands things as they really are. We develop mindfulness. The Buddha says this is the direct path for the purification of beings. What do we notice? What makes up wisdom? We see that things are changing. We notice impermanence. You know, the chants that's chanted in Pali in many monasteries is from the teachings of the Buddha. It goes, all things are impermanent, they arise and they pass away. To be in harmony with this truth brings peace. Again, really a universal sentiment to be aware of impermanence and to, as part of that, know our own impermanence. Know that we will not last forever. The poet Rilke says, we are forever taking leave of each other. From the Psalms, from the Jewish Bible, says, teach us to number our days that we may get a heart of wisdom. Being aware of impermanence and death leads to wisdom. We notice dukkha, or reactivity. We see how we get constricted, how we grasp, how we get caught in negativity or being judgmental or whatever. We see, for the Buddha, we see not self. We see how we go beyond the ordinary self at different times to interconnection, to the love which goes beyond the narrow sense of self. You know, and we go to become what the Buddha called a big person, a Mahātta, a great being, the same term that was used for Gandhi. And we also, as part of our practice, we awaken to the sacred. We awaken to Nibbana. We go beyond We go beyond our ordinary experience and touch something very large. And we could also say, and I won't go into this in detail at all, but one of my mentors and teachers was a man named Houston Smith. Anyone know Houston Smith's work? Wonderful teacher. And I studied with him. I was part of a small group of people who studied with him one summer in Berkeley when I was still living in Kentucky. And he was an advocate of the view that at their contemplative and mystical depths or heights, whatever metaphor we use, all the traditions of the world are saying the same thing. And we explored this for a summer together with Houston, and he's been a mentor to me. He died several years ago in his late 90s, but he has maintained that perspective that the awakening of the Buddha is the same as the coming to know God of the Jewish mystics or the Christian mystics or the Islamic mystics. You know, one of the great Islamic mystics said, you know, that I am not different from God. He got some slack for that. Not some slack, he got into some problems with saying that, but that was his claim. Or Ramakrishna says, at the deepest level, this is from the Hindu tradition, I saw a limitless, infinite ocean of consciousness. This is often how awakening is described, very similar across traditions. One of my favorite passages from the Tibetan tradition is from the 16th century, Dagpo Tashi Namgal. I've often practiced with this. The description of awakening: open like the sky, pervasive like the earth, unshakable like a mountain, shining like a flame. Really beyond language, in the same way that in Jewish tradition, one can't really express fully the name of God. Or in the way in Muslim tradition, there are 99 names of Allah, and the 100th is silent. Interesting, right? And so I want to finish, and then we can open up for some discussion with kind of an obvious question that could come from what I've said. We may find that, okay, there's this simple way I can talk about my practice, and there's this, you know, I can see how there's a shared heart in some ways between traditions, but what about all the, I don't know, the Christian nationalists in the US? Or what about all the ways that religions have been used as a justification for war? Or all the different ways that there are religions historically involved with violence and divisiveness and so forth. What do we make of that? What do I make of that? If we were going to look thoroughly at this, we'd probably take a few weeks. So I'm going to give like a few minute response, okay? But I would say that one of the main reasons why we don't, even in our culture, have this sense of the shared heart of things is that historically, in most traditions, I think even including Buddhist tradition, the contemplative, meditative, and mystical dimensions of the tradition have been lost. In Christianity and Judaism, maybe not lost, but marginalized. In Christianity and Judaism, this goes back probably 700 or 800 years. There still are mystics, but they're not mainstream. You know, and so people growing up don't know the contemplative and mystical traditions. And, you know, it's marginalized. So you can find it if you go to the Abbey of Gethsemane, but you won't find it at mainstream churches. They're lacking in that. And because I think it's really through the contemplative and mystical traditions that we find that kind of shared unity. And the other quick reason I'll give is that religion gets connected with power and governments and becomes often a way of justifying violence and what government does. And these two issues also appear in Buddhist tradition. You know, the reason that we're practicing Buddhist practice right now is because we were able to have people go to Burma and Thailand and study with reform movements which are only 100 years old, going back to some of the old texts. But the traditions from Burma and Thailand that we have learned from, that came with people like Jack Kornfield and other teachers, weren't there in the mainstream in 1850. If you go back to Burma and Thailand, religion, if you call it that, Buddhism, looked pretty much like Christianity or Judaism looks like in our culture. They did rituals for marriage and death and so forth. There's almost no record of meditation. It was resuscitated, and then that's another story. But in other words, in those cultures, it's pretty much the same as ours. Plus, you go back and you can see the way that Buddhism was sometimes used to justify violence. So the same issues are there actually in Buddhist tradition as well. So let me finish just with a few quotes. I'll go back to the Dalai Lama. My religion is kindness. He also said, the purpose of all major religious traditions is not to construct big temples on the outside, but to create temples of goodness and compassion inside in our hearts. Maybe I'll stop there. We can have some time to talk. So let me invite us maybe to take a minute now, just in silence, to reflect on anything that may have resonated, maybe questions that have come up. Take a minute right now and see what's there for you, and then we'll open things up to talking together. So thank you very much. You know, I think in summary, my talk was really about what's sometimes called right view, how we understand our practice and how we might really keep the essential elements in mind and keep it simple. So let me stop there and open things up. I think first we have Tom, looks like, and you can help me bring in the voices of people in the hall. Yeah. Please, Tom.
Thank you, Donald, for another great talk, as always. I think it's very interesting that you sort of came full circle. You started off talking about, there's wisdom and compassion, but there's this third element of courage, which, you related was brought in during a time of conflict. And then, of course, you ended talking about how religion and these practices can be co-opted to justify violence. Last time I was at Vajrapani, I was speaking with a nun there, and we were talking, and she said, "Oh yeah, there's this third element. There's the two wings, and then there's the tail," which she related as power, but that could be seen as courage. She said there are practices for wisdom, there are practices for courage, but there aren't a lot of practices centered around here's how you develop your power. She said because it's an outcome, it's a natural result when you do the two wings. But and So I agree with you. I'm just wondering, what is it about? I guess I sort of think that religion is particularly because it pulls at people. We get swept up in it, that it is particularly susceptible to being utilized to justify violence, almost like nothing else that we see in society. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there are many thoughts. I'll just go back and say that also in Tibetan tradition, there's also something very similar, a threefold distinction between view, which is the wisdom aspect, view or wisdom, meditation, and then conduct, which brings in the ethical dimension. So that's there in Tibetan tradition. Yeah, what is it about religion? Yeah, well, I think it's that for one thing, the people in power want legitimization. They want somehow to be sanctified. And the people in power typically are not devout spiritual practitioners. There are exceptions to that. What was the great Indian emperor who converted, Ashoka, right? Who, whatever it was, something like almost 2,000 years ago, abolished capital punishment, right? Millennia ago did that. So I think that the rulers are not practitioners. That's one thing, and they use it in a manipulative way. They're concerned with powers. That's one major area. And that maybe another part of it is that many of these traditions, the depths were realized in monasteries and in among hermits, right? And they didn't necessarily have teachings about how you bring this out into the larger world. It's interesting, right? When you think about it, in the way that we've tried to do with socially engaged Buddhism, we've tried to say, let us be grounded in Buddhist teachings and also have it be a guide for how we can be in the world. So I think we haven't had too many guides for religion that come out of the depths of the tradition because they've generally been separated out from the rulers. Those are two ideas which come right away to me, which makes some sense.
Yeah. And it makes sense that those subtle practices are not conducive to lists and rules and things like that. But the other ones are, and those are the teachings that make it out into the world and then get, utilized for power. So,
but I would say that we can do that now. That's the difference, right? That, what I think is most needed in our time, and I haven't quite got it together yet, but I've wanted to organize a training program that took people to the depths of spiritual practice at the same time that they are engaged in the world, which I think we deeply need. So I think what's really calling me and many people is to have ways of being in the world, whether it's, as a member of a government or as an activist, whatever, that we deeply need now that come out of a simultaneous going very deeply in practice. So I think that's possible now.
thank you. If you develop that, I'll sign up.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much, Tom.
Oops, we have a couple of hands in the room. Go ahead, Lee, speak up for the recording.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Donald. And so I was at the GBF retreat that you led.
Yeah, I'm not hearing it great. Is there a way to get close to a microphone?
Give me a second. All right, try it now.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Is that better?
Way, way better, yeah, thank you.
Oh, great. So I was at the GBF retreat that you led, and you recommended a book there by, I remember all of this correctly, though I look at it every day, Rob, and I've read all of it, Rothberg on the topic of dependent origination.
Yeah, yeah.
Which for me fits with, it's about the nature of our existence.
Yeah.
And for me, it fits with determinism, which I came to think was valid when I was 17 and haven't changed.
Yeah.
And it also fits with what I know of modern physics, which is a very different, but comes out in the same place. And it seems to me that it's that question of the nature of existence that underlies contemplation. And then the question is how that connects with the other things about, which I would call how to behave in the world,
Yeah.
ethics and so forth. And I'm not sure if it's appropriate here, but if you have anything to say about that, I'd be interested.
No, thank you for really making some of those connections. Really, really helpful. It really also calls to mind, I think, what you're pointing to, and I think that what was it, the book by Rob Rebea, Seeing That Frees, right? I think that was the book. And but pointing to the way that, what would it be like if we had a unified way of understanding that brought together, much like I've suggested, all of the traditions at their depths or heights, whatever metaphor you use, along with science, and points to, and with all the dimensions, including action and ethics and so forth. And what would it be like if this was more and more accepted in the world? Would not this be, I think this could be a force for tremendous good if we have that way of understanding. So, so I think that's a way of sort of taking what I've suggested a few steps further, really. And, what would it be like if people from all over the world said, yeah, we're unified in this, and we have to work together and understand our commonality to deal with climate issues or political polarization or all the different questions. To me, this, and bringing in some of the pieces you mentioned really helps fill it out. So thank you for that.
Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Donald. This is fascinating. I used to have a therapist who was also.
Can we move the mic possibly close to, or maybe come up with the mic?
It's complicated.
Yeah, can you hear me better now?
It's totally tangled. I can't untangle it without unplugging it. Hey, what?
What'd you do?
Don't do that.
Donald, can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay. I used to have a therapist who was also an Aikido instructor, and he really brought to my awareness a path of a warrior.
Yeah.
And I was really impressed that all warriors had a code of ethics.
Of what?
A code of ethics.
Oh, yeah,
A
yeah.
moral code. And it strikes me that you're talking about from a very foundation of secular existence, that to live a spiritual life, or as we call it, but simply a good life, is to have the code of ethics to live by. Is that what
Yeah.
you're saying?
Yeah, really, I think really, really crucial. And, the sense of the warrior, maybe we could use other words if some people are uncomfortable with the word warrior, but it really points to someone who's really, basically dedicated to bring in whatever we call it, fierce compassion to help others, right? Something
Yes.
similar to the Bodhisattva in certain ways. And one thing which was sparked by what you were bringing up, the having the code of ethics, is that there are ways in which Western Buddhism has emphasized meditation so much that ethics has sometimes been marginalized. And we have groups that are sometimes even they're called meditation groups, right? And we might bring in ethics at the beginning of retreats, but they're not really clearly there as a main way of practicing. And that's unfortunate because, I've worked with groups sometimes where we've worked with the ethical precepts, where we would, take a precept, work with it for a month, take a second precept, work for a month, and so forth. And of course, one of the ethical guidelines is about speech, and that can be such a fundamental way of practicing in our daily lives. So I think there are ways that we need to remember that meditation's crucial, and it's a way of making up for the way that the contemplative traditions in the West have been marginalized. But we have to find ways to bring in the ethics in our practice and our teaching. So really helpful to highlight that. Thank you.
Thank you.
How are we doing for time? Should we take one more and then finish up?
Yeah, I think we have time for another one, and Stefan is asking a question.
Yes, most religions include prayer, and I don't really know how prayer fits into Buddhist practices.
Yeah, how does prayer fit in?
Yeah.
I think it's understood in different ways. Maybe most broadly as the use of words and language to move one's heart and being in a certain direction. I know when I was learning how to teach loving kindness or metta practice, my mentor was Sylvia Boorstein, still a good friend. We still teach together. And she talked about the repetition of the metta or loving kindness phrases. May you be happy, may you be safe, may you be healthy or as healthy as possible. May you live with ease, may you live with love. That Sylvia talked about the way that we in a loving kindness practice or in loving kindness retreats would repeat these all day. And she talked about that as a form of fervent prayer. She said this is a kind of prayer. Or I think of, again, from getting to know Thomas Merton's work in the Christian tradition, how he talked about contemplative prayer and used that word, and it wasn't very different from how we would understand many forms of meditation. So I think it's used by different people in different ways, but there is a lot of usage where there's a lot of overlap with our meditation. So I think it could be used as a bridge with some people, some traditions. Yeah, hope that makes some sense. Yeah.
Well, I know in recovery, and the 11th step talks about sought through prayer and meditation
Yeah.
for a conscious contact with a higher power of your understanding. And it's kind of like, maybe my question is about what's the higher power? Is it the
higher power, again, talked about in different ways and in different dimensions of each tradition. I am drawn to the idea that I think I first got from Houston Smith, that there's a unity across traditions at their mystical apex, and that at the mystical apex they are pointing to being in touch with the highest power. Some would call it God, some would call it nirvana, some would call it vast awareness. People call it different things. Some would call it love, or a vast love. So that's my inclination. And what Houston did was he showed that when you actually look closely at the actual experience reported by mystics across traditions, you can see that from the standpoint of lived experience, they're talking about something which seems identical, if not very close. or I should say very close, if not identical.
Thanks.
And I would be comfortable talking about the higher power as something in ourselves, or the way that in Hindu tradition it said, the highest power, the highest level of the self, or the highest power of the self is the same as the deepest nature of reality. In Hindu tradition, it said Atman is the same as Brahman. Right, so I think that's getting at something very similar. Does that resonate some?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Donald. It's time to wrap up. Thank you for your juicy Dharma. It was juicy.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. That's juice for me.